Today's agenda is as follows. Welcome and introductions. What is the HCBS final rule? There's two main parts we will be discussing. Services in the community. What is HCBS? Meeting the final rule regulations, and what California is doing to get ready to meet the final rule, and then conclusion. First off, with welcome and introductions, I'd like to say that we have an esteemed group of panelists today that have a wide range of experience within this field. We have individuals that have worked at residential facilities as well as day programs and other programs alike. And they also have a multitude of experience within the regional center system. We have a director of community services, HCBS program evaluator, a client advocate, and a self-advocate as well. First off, I'd like to get started today by introducing our first speaker, who's Elizabeth Hassler. She is a client advocate at the Redwood Coast Regional Center and a self-advocate that's made it her life's work to advocate for people that also receive services from the regional center. And after Elizabeth, we have Sierra Braggs, who is a HCBS program evaluator with the Redwood Coast Regional Center. And Courtney Singleton will be following Sierra, and Courtney is a director of community services at the North Bay Regional Center. And then last but not least will be Sonia Garibay, who's also a CBS program evaluator with the Frank D. Lanterman Regional Center. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Sydney. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. Oh, thank you. Really, we're here to talk about the understanding what the HCBS final rule is. And HCBS stands for Home and Community-Based Settings. And that means everywhere that people with disabilities live that isn't an institution. And the final rule is basically a big change in how the government helps. It's a big change in how people with disabilities receive services in our community. And many services that people with disabilities receive are paid for by Medicaid. And every state has a different Medicaid program. And in California, it's called Medi-Cal. And the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, is the organization that is in charge of making sure that the final rule happens and is good for everyone. But the most important thing to understand about the final rule is that it is just a way of making sure that people with all different disabilities have choices and are able to be connected to our communities. And so historically, people with disabilities, including intellectual and developmental disabilities, have tended to be kept away or put in places where there are only other people with disabilities and staff. And that's really not okay. And it's also not safe for people. Sorry, I'm very nervous because this is an important thing to understand. And in some cases, it does represent a big change, but it is also really just a continuation of the work that the regional center has always been doing since the regional center system was started. The main goal was really to get people out of institutions and into the community. And the home and community-based settings final rule is really just making sure that that happens even in situations where that might be considered to be difficult, because it's one thing that we say sometimes is that we can take the people out of the institution, but it's different to take the institution out of the services. And that so often an institution is thought of as it's a big place where people live. So then if you live in a place that has fewer people that live there, that means it's not an institution anymore. But one thing that self-advocates have realized is that an institution is about how many choices you have when you live there and how connected you can be to other parts of your community when you want. And so one thing that comes up is called the burrito test. So if you're able to get a burrito at night where you live, and that's like a thing that you can do, that has been understood to mean that you don't live in an institution. And the HCBS final rule is a continuation of an important Supreme Court case called Olmstead, where self-advocates who were friends, and they were really brave, and they went to a lawyer and said that they didn't want to live in an institution anymore. And it took a long time, but eventually the Supreme Court agreed and said that everybody deserves to live in our communities and have different choices and options for things that we want to do. It doesn't matter.
Sorry, it looks like we lost Elizabeth's audio.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back, Elizabeth.
Okay. So and this is really the most important thing to understand, is that regardless of what your disability is, or how easy it is for you to communicate, or how much you mess up on Zoom, everybody deserves the support and options they need to live in the community and have choices and be connected. And the final rule was first put into federal law in 2014, and now it's gonna be fully rolled out by next year, at March 17th, 2023. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so just to, I think I may have said this already, but that really making sure that our services are community-based. And that means that wherever you are and whatever services you receive. So home and community-based services are anything that doesn't happen in a hospital or a nursing home. And so we all have different services that we need, right, to be successful. But whatever it is, it would need to fit with the final rule, which is making sure that people have choices and community, and that our rights are respected. And the American Institution of Intellectual Developmental Disabilities tells us that we should have, that adults and children both have rights to things that are very important. And children have the right to live with their families and have the right to the supports that they need and have the right to nurturing relationships, friendships, to be part of a general education classroom, and to participate in the same activities as children without disabilities. Adults should have the opportunity for relationships of our own choosing, to live in a home where we choose and with whom we choose. So we should have different options that we get to pick from, and we should have control over our supports, and we should have meaningful work. And meaningful work would be work that is meaningful to the person, right? So I know a lot of people who like paper routes, and that's the favorite part of a program that they go to. But if I was going to have a paper route, I would not be good at that at all. So, and a lot of the time, meaningful work does, like if you need to go to college, in order to find meaningful work for you, that should be something that is possible. And also to have inclusive recreation, which is just things that we like to do and different activities in the community. So that's not just for kids, it's for adults too. And yeah, the main thing about all of these rights is just to be included in normal life, right? If we live in the community, then we should have the same rights as other people in our communities and be able to engage in the same activities and not be separated and alone. And I'll pass it to Sierra.
Hello. So there are two main parts to the home and community-based settings final rule. And the part that I want to talk about is person-centered planning. So the really cool thing about HCBS is that the federal regulation actually put into law that we will do person-centered planning in the services that are provided with federal funding and with state funding. So the person-centered plans that we're talking about is the individual program plan and the individual service plan. So the individual program plan is the plan that the service coordinator writes from the regional center. And the individual program plan is really about the person's whole life, right? What are their whole goals, and what are all the services and supports needed to achieve those goals? And then the individual service plan is the plan that's written by the service provider that's very specific to the services that that provider is going to carry out to support the person. So the individual program plan really needs to be a vision for the person's whole life, right? And it needs to be driven by and for the person receiving services to the extent that that's possible, to the extent that a person can participate in their planning process. And so you can imagine that creating a person-centered plan for somebody who can communicate exactly what they want and need and can share their hopes and dreams with you, that's kind of an easier process because they can tell you. But for a person who maybe is nonverbal or who doesn't have a formal communication system, to include them in the planning process takes a lot more upfront work. All person-centered planning should include pre-planning, but it especially needs to take that into account for someone who maybe doesn't have a traditional means of communication or a formal communication system. And so what that can mean is really talking with the person and with the people closest to them who know them well before you have a person-centered planning meeting to find out what's working for you, what's not working, what's a good day look like, what's a bad day look like, what are your hopes and dreams? And then working with that person and their team to come up with a plan for how to reach those hopes and dreams. So some examples of a person, that I worked with who was nonverbal and didn't have a formal communication system and was also blind. For their person-centered planning meeting, we met at his home, and he was on some cushions on the floor. You know, he was really comfortable in that space, and he had a fidget that he was using. And as we were going through the discussion, as I was talking with his mom, when he was listening, he was paying attention. And when we talked about things he liked, he would smile, he would laugh, he would light up, right? And so I knew that this is something he really does like. So when we were talking about the beach, he was so happy. He started laughing. You could tell he really likes the beach. And then later, as we're going through the meeting and we started talking about his medical support needs, and the dentist came up, and he actually began to cry and whimper and appeared to be in distress, right? And his mom let me know, well, that's actually, he hates the dentist. So it's not, you didn't, do anything wrong. He just doesn't want to go to the dentist. That's not something he's into. And so, although his mom was the person providing me with information, I could see the accuracy of the information she was giving me based on his responses. And so it's really important that we're always involving the person in their planning process. And it can be done whatever that person's, level of support needs are. But also, we don't have to make someone sit through a meeting, right? If a person just does not like meetings, they don't have to sit through their whole meeting. They can just agree to the plan, right? There can be all the pre-work that goes into it, the discussions about what's important to them, what's important for them. And then, but it's not person-centered to make someone sit through a meeting. So it's the full range, right? And then in terms of whose job it is to make that happen, the service coordinator is really the person that is facilitating the person-centered planning process, helping that person to advocate for themselves, helping to invite anyone that needs to come to that meeting. And then the role of the service provider, oftentimes, service providers are the people who spend some of the most time with a person served. And they may be the first person to find, the first person besides the person served to find out the plan isn't working, right? And then their role is to help that person advocate to their service coordinator, hey, I need a change, or, we might need to modify something. Every person-centered plan needs to include the person's strengths, their interests, their goals, their medical needs, and what services are being provided to them. What home and community-based services are the services funded by the federal government and by the state. And so these services need to be included in the plan. And then what are the outcomes from these services? What is the person getting out of these services? That should all be included in the person-centered plan. Next slide, please. So the main part, the person-centered plan needs to be by the person, for the person. They need to live where they want to live with who they want to live with, work in the kind of work they want to do, right? Their life should be their life based on what they want and need. And the IPP, the person-centered planning team, needs to consider various paths to help somebody get to their goals. We may both be going to the grocery store, but we might take different routes to get there. We might take different modes of transportation. And the same thing with a person-centered plan, right? We may have the person looking at their goal. What is the best way to support that person to achieve their goals? And then the team needs to support the person to make meaningful, informed decisions. This means that, sometimes I hear, well, we gave her a choice of, an apple or an orange, and she pushed it away. Well, maybe she didn't want fruit at all, right? Maybe she wanted a vegetable. Maybe she wanted a cookie, right? The point is to give people lots of options so that they can truly make a choice about what they want. And then beyond snacks, we need to make sure people really understand the consequences of the choices they're making. So, for example, I was working with a man who lived in Del Norte County, which is on the far north coast of California. It's usually between 60 and 70 degrees there in the summertime. There's not a drought there right now. It's the only part of the state not in drought. And this man was homeless and he needed a place to live. And the only affordable housing we could find for him was far away. And it was in a hot place, over 100 degrees this summer, right? And there's fires. And for him to have made an informed choice, his team would have really needed to help him go and visit that place. Do you really want to move here? And he might have still made the same choice to move to that place, but he would have seen where he was going. He might have even identified additional services or supports that he needed to be successful there. So, really making sure people understand what their choices mean. And then I mentioned earlier, problem solving, right? Life doesn't usually go according to plan. And a person-centered plan is a living document. It's a living plan. It changes. It can change at any time. And it's everybody's job to advocate for that change when it needs to happen, starting with the person served, making sure they speak up as soon as they know there needs to be a change, but everyone else as well. And then to make adjustments as needed in a timely manner. This is one of the most important parts, is being able to be reflective, reflexive, and responsive when things change. So there was a man who was working in a grocery store and he had been doing great, but then his work duties changed and he needed to start working in the cooler. And he was refusing to go into the cooler. And so his job coach met with him and talked with him. And they learned that, he didn't want to go in the cooler because it's cold. And so the job coach was like, well, the grocery store provides these jackets. You can wear one of these jackets. And he was like, those are disgusting. They're filthy. I'm not going to wear that. So the job coach moved really quickly to convene the team to determine, what does he need to be able to do this? And he just needed his own coat. And for that person, his team included Department of Rehab, and they were able to buy him the coat, and he was able to continue working at his job. But you can imagine if he had not gotten that coat quickly, he may have lost his job, right? How long is your supervisor going to allow you to just refuse to do certain duties, And so it's really critical as we're going through to work with people to reach their goals, that we're really, really mindful when barriers come up, and how are we troubleshooting? How are we problem solving when that happens, so that we can meet the needs that people have. And now I'll turn it over to Courtney.
Okay, thank you, Sierra. So Sierra talked about the first main part of the final rule, and I'm going to talk about the second main part. So the first part was the plan, and making sure there is a person-centered plan. And the second is really where and how those services take place. And we'll start with the where. The where is in the individual's home and in their community. So the HCBS final rule really emphasizes that people with disabilities should be living in their community beside people without disabilities. So people with disabilities should be your neighbor, should be my neighbor. They shouldn't be segregated, all living in one location, away from everybody else. The next is being involved in the community. And we all know that means something different for each of us. So that could mean dining out, shopping, attending a church, or some type of religious group, recreation, or being part of some type of social group. But it's really important that people with disabilities have the option to make informed choices of all those things. Making a choice really between Taco Bell and Jack in the Box, where there are so many other options possibly that the person hasn't ever been exposed to, isn't really a choice. So really allowing someone to go visit different restaurants and sit in different restaurants and try different restaurants, and then picking the one that they really want to go to. It's the same with shopping, same with recreation, church, social groups, really having options and making that choice for that specific individual, and not necessarily for all the people with disabilities that may live together in one setting. The other setting that we talk about a lot is work. So the CMS final rule really talks about individuals working side by side with people without disabilities. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this name, HCBS or CMS final rule. So kind of what are the rules? One of the main points of the HCBS rules is that to ensure, the federal government's trying to ensure that we don't create many institutions in our community, meaning we don't group people with disabilities together and segregate them from everybody else in the community. So some of the rules that the federal government has decided will help with this are things like individuals must choose services from different options. So what does that really mean? If you or I are looking for a roommate, we really are interviewing people, finding out likes, dislikes. Are you a morning person? Are you a night person? Loud music? Do you like sports? Do you not like sports? So that should be the same for an individual with a disability. If say an individual is going to move, into a licensed care home, Well, they should go there and visit and meet the individuals. Is this a home that watches football on Monday, Thursday, and Sunday and monopolizes the main television in the house all the time? And the other person has no interest in sports whatsoever. Maybe that's not the best match for them. But really going and seeing and exploring all the options before they're making that final choice and to be part of their community. Another part of the rule is the services or the setting need to promote privacy, dignity, and respect. So when we're talking about privacy, has anybody really explained to the individual their right to privacy? Does the individual know they can close the door in their room? They could lock the door in their room if they want. Where can they take a personal phone call if they don't want people overhearing them? The individual needs to have input on how their personal care is received. Do they want to take a shower in the morning? Do they want to take a shower in the evening? Do they prefer a male or a female staff? It really needs to be based on the individual, not on necessarily the staffing pattern or the staff that are available in the home. So just really having those discussions with those individuals. Making life choices is another big part of the HCBS final rule. What do you want to do today? How do you like your physical environment? What foods do you want to eat? When do you want to eat? Controlling your schedule. When you get up in the morning, what time? Some people are morning people, some people are not. What time you go to sleep at night? Who you spend your time with, and who you have romantic relationships with. What HCBS is not everyone getting what they want immediately at all times. It's not for the vendor to, okay, you want to, you want to go play golf, we're going right now. And it's not everyone getting the same thing. So if an individual with a disability says, I want to go swimming, it doesn't mean that the service provider that's providing the service has to take that person swimming immediately. It really means that the service provider has to help the individual come up with a plan to go swimming. And it doesn't mean that it's a plan that's 6 months away. And when it's raining and cold, it needs to be in a reasonable amount of time. But it's meeting that person's needs, and wants and desires and choices, but not immediately for a lot of the things. It's really helping them to come up with a plan. Not all of us can have everything we want immediately, but we can set up a plan and work our way to meet that goal. Next slide, please. So again, we've talked a lot about the rules, a lot about the plans. What kind of services are we talking about when we say services? So services funded by a regional center that group people with disabilities. Those are really the services that the HCBS final rule applies to. So day and work programs, oftentimes the staffing ratio is 1 staff to 3 clients, 1 staff to 2 clients. Some individuals go to a site or a building to receive their services. Some are in the community all day, but they still may have 1 or 2 other individuals with disabilities with them, determining their activities for the day. So those types of programs need to comply with all the things we've been talking about. Residential homes is another. Usually there are 4 to 6 people living there that have disabilities, and it could be a medical home, a behavioral home, an elderly home, home for children, or for adults. All of those different types of homes need to comply with the HCBS final rule. Another service is group employment services. So oftentimes there are employment services where there is 1 staff and 3 individuals with disabilities, all working together at the same site. And as I mentioned in the first slide, I spoke about the final rule is really about people with disabilities working right next to people without disabilities. The last main service is a family home agency, and that's where an individual with a disability lives with the family and the community. And typically there are 2 or less people with disabilities living in that home. But that as well, that situation, you really, it has to be what the individuals want and helping them to make informed choices in that situation. And I will turn it over to Sonia.
Thank you, Courtney. So now I'm going to talk about meeting the final rule. So you've heard a lot about what some of the requirements are. If you're a service provider, you are working on coming into compliance, or you're in process of making modifications to your programs to ensure that you're meeting the requirements that have already been talked about. So these changes can be changes to your policies within your agency, the procedures. Big part of that would be staff training to ensure that the requirements are met, especially a lot of the person-centered stuff. It's important as a provider to make sure that your staff understand what person-centered services are, why they're in place, and what that looks like. So in some cases, as in many, modifications need to be made to the requirements on an individualized basis. So that's in some cases, exceptions are made to the requirements to ensure the health and safety of an individual. So for example, I don't think we've talked about this one yet, but access to food anytime, maybe someone with, like, for example, Prader-Willi, there is a bit of a modification there. There's agreement with the person receiving services, the planning team, the service provider, everyone in the circle of support is on board with that modification. How often we visit that modification, just because an exception is in place doesn't mean it stays forever. We always want to strive for the most independent life for any individual. So that's something that you revisit and you decide, hey, is it time to ease up on the modification and fully ensure that this person, for example, the example I gave you, food at any time, is it time that, we remove the restrictions? So as a planning team, you decide when that review takes place. So, and make sure that you do it on a regular basis and make whatever new modification needs to be made to the plan. So, and for an individual served, what does it mean meeting the final rule? So one of those important aspects of the final rule, as Courtney's already touched on this, and I think everyone pretty much, privacy is a big aspect of it. So what does that mean? Basically, it could be the protection of the individual served's personal information. For example, like what we call confidentiality. Not everyone needs to know everything about the individual served. Information is provided on an as-need basis and typically with the consent of the individual being served. So also privacy can also mean something else. It could mean that when the person is receiving services that, for example, like a personal care service, that curtains are used, doors are closed, some type of effort is made to make sure that the same privacy anyone would expect is provided to the individual served. So another aspect of the final rule is protection from eviction. So if the person is in a provider-owned setting, residing in, for example, a licensed home, This means that the individual has the protections of a tenant. So they can't, without good cause, can't be evicted. So that's also a very important aspect of it. Another aspect is making sure that services take place in the community, not just with people with disabilities. So this means that the person being served is supported to participate in activities at their local church, for example, or religious center of their choice. So there may be different activities happening. If this is the choice of the individual, then this should be something that's made available. Okay, so also another example is if someone who likes to engage in physical exercise, joining the local gym, not just being stuck at home all the time. Joining a local gym may be a way to meet others, have positive, meaningful interactions with people. The local Pilates center, the YMCA. Also, supporting individuals in attending schools. For minors, it may be in the form of advocacy, helping them find the local school, finding something appropriate. For adults, it may be that if they wish to, for example, attend college, that supports are provided to make that possible. And this all goes back to the person-centered planning, where you discuss the wishes of the individual and talk about a plan of how this can become a reality. Okay, so same for jobs. So if the person should be able to apply for a job, get a job, receive the needed supports, and the needed supports to maintain and do the job. So it can look very differently for each individual. The level of support, what's needed, how long. Again, that's all part of the planning. Okay, so service providers also will help the individual participate in their community. So this could be that they're providing staff to support the individual if this is someone who needs support to be out in the community. Also, it could be for someone who can be more independent, helping them set up transportation, whether it's the church group coming out and picking them up, whether it's setting up like a service such as access services, where that service comes, picks you up, drops you off where you need to go. And then another way to make sure that people are participating in their community is helping them find activities that are local. So getting to know the person, knowing their interests, and helping them find activities that may be of interest to them. Okay, so also the role of a service provider would be to make sure that the focus stays on the goals of the individual. So helping with advocacy, which we've kind of already talked about, reminding the team what's important to and for the person. And also at times it may be reminding the individual served, hey, this is what you're working on. Hey, you can do this. And, you know, it may be in the form of daily reminders. It may be that you're reviewing that, you know, depending on how often the individual really needs that support or their support staff. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so the rule says that for specifically to homes for people with disabilities, people need to be given choices. Okay, so this means that it could be receiving support from a favorite staff. We know that it's possible in some situations. In some situations, because of the staffing ratio, there may be just one staff on the schedule. So as much as possible, giving the choice of which staff supports the individual. Also, I know this has been talked about already, but this does apply specifically to residential services, is when to eat. The individual chooses when they eat their meals. So what they eat. They can have a input in terms of their what's on the menu. In some situations, the individuals help prepare the meal to the extent that they're able to assist. Okay, where you eat your meal is another choice. The person can choose to eat in the dining room with everyone else, the kitchen with everyone else, or they can choose to eat alone. It could be something they do on a regular basis, or it could be, hey, today I'm just not feeling like being around other people. I want to eat alone, and that should be okay. How the person decorates their room. So when you enter into the room of the individual, you should be able to see a reflection of who they are, their interests. So, and we'll come back a little bit to that in a second. So, some other choices that should be given to a person with disabilities is where to get healthcare. So sometimes we know that in some of our residential homes, the doctors are coming to the residential home. We feel that there should be a choice, and being out in the community, seeing a doctor out in the community, a dentist, is another opportunity to have interactions with people that are not disabled. So another example is where getting a haircut. I know with some service providers, the person that the hairstylist comes out to the home. That's great if the individual is someone who can't leave the home for one reason or another, or doesn't want to. But if the individual is happy to go out to the local hair salon and meet the local people, that's something that should be available. Where they shop also, it shouldn't all be, oh, we're shopping on Amazon, unless that's the choice of the individual. So, and we're not buying everybody the same thing. The individual should be able to pick and choose what they want, what color, etc. Okay, so another aspect of this is how to spend their money. So the individual served, you know, they may not have a ton of money, but hey, they want to splurge on a nice pair of shoes. Okay, so they, you know, if that's what the person chooses, just making sure they understand, hey, if you're buying these expensive, really nice shoes, you're not going to be able to buy such and such. You're going to need to wait for that. As long as the understanding is there, you know, the person should be able to purchase that item. Also, I know we've already talked about this, but also important is the person should be able to choose how they spend their time and who they spend their time with. So I know a lot of time is spent on planning activities, so, you know, not every individual wants to do what wants to do. So there should be ways to make sure that the person who doesn't want to go to the movies and join the group can go to the bookstore. Maybe they enjoy something of a quieter activity. Okay, so also, yeah, we've already talked about privacy, but I'm going to mention it again. Closing doors when assisting with personal care, using dividers in a room, in a bedroom when possible. And then again, protecting information of the individual and not leaving it out in plain sight for others to see. Let's see, so the final rule also says that the person with a disability should not be bullied into doing things that they don't want to do. or say things they don't want to say. So, for example, actually, it's not a great example, but let's say that everyone in the home wants to go see the Top Gun movie. The individual that we're talking about here prefers quieter activities, is sensitive to noise. You know, they should not feel like, hey, I have to go, everyone's going, and for them to be influenced by others to do something that's unpleasant to them. So they should, there's protection for that. Controlling your own schedule. I know we've talked about this already to some extent. So we know that within licensed residential homes, they have structured days, which you know, can be beneficial for the most part to all of us. You know, such as when we wake up, meal times, activities such as games, TV watching, chores, exercise, bedtime. You know, we like structure in our day because that's how we get things done. But at the same time, like, you know, days like weekends, or if we're not working, we don't, you know, we like to have a leisurely day, have slower past day. So, you know, being able to kind of choose when we do things, what we do, not doing them should be a choice. Also, having visitors at the person's choosing. So it could be the visitor of their choosing at the time of their choosing, but also keeping in mind that there are other housemates, roommates whose schedules also need to be taken into consideration. So this is an important aspect of being a good tenant, a good neighbor, and a good housemate. Okay, so the final rule. Okay, so yeah, says that homes for people with disabilities provide food at any time. So meals are prepared at certain times as required for a provider. However, if you know the person's not hungry at the time the meal is ready, you know, the person should be able to come back and eat when they're ready to eat, when they're hungry. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so choices in homes, choice of roommates. As it was mentioned earlier also, meeting the person who you're going to be sharing a home with, or especially if you're sharing a bedroom, is really important. And this is one of the requirements of the rule. So both individuals should be able to meet and agree whether they'd be suitable roommates for one another. And if that's agreed upon, there should be documentation in both of their individualized program plans and individualized service plans. The right to have a key, a lock, to be able to have a lock on their bedroom door is something that is also something that can be provided by a service provider. This doesn't mean everyone gets a key, everyone, you know, automatically gets a key. It just means that if the individual, everyone should be asked, hey, is this something that's important to you? Is this something you want? I know in some cases we have individuals where they have, you know, roommates that aren't as respectful. They'll come in and into their bedrooms and move stuff and take things from time to time. So, you know, sorry about that. Somehow I went on mute. Can be anxiety causing for the individual. So being able to lock their bedroom when they leave the home is an important aspect of privacy and should be available to the individual. Okay, so privacy, again, this is obviously, as you can see, very important. We've mentioned it multiple times. as we talked about privacy with, in terms of information and personal privacy. People also being able to furnish and decorate their rooms. Someone's room should, and even home, should reflect the person's personal taste, such as sports memorabilia. If the person is a big sports fan, you know, you want to know, hey, they're a Dodger fan, they're a Giants fan. And again, when people are visiting, you know, there's a topic of conversation there. Oh, so you're a Dodger fan. So, you know, this is also part of the social aspect of things, and learning more about the individual. So having that reflection of them is important. I personally enjoy going to homes where I can immediately learn something about the person living in the home. And, you know, the things in the home give us a hint of things we may have in common with them. Okay, so choosing your own activities. If the person enjoys sports, activities coordinated to include this preference, whether it means the person is participating in a sport at a local park, in the backyard, or watching a professional team play at a local stadium or arena. Same for if a person enjoys knitting. Is there a local knitting club? Is there, can you form, and you know, for individuals who prefer not to leave the home or not leave the home as often, can you form I know of a home where the ladies have, they've formed a knitting club in their own home. And, you know, another like social aspect here is shopping. They can go shopping for yarn, for needles, for books on knitting styles. And that's a form of just also bonding, getting to know the people at the knitting store, finding that little community. And lastly here, visitors at any time. So friends should be welcomed as long as respectful to others and can follow the agreements between the housemates themselves. So that's it for me. Passing it over to Sierra.
Thank you, Sonia. So California is getting ready, right? So the home and community-based settings final rule went into effect in 2014. And for the last 8 years, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services has been working with all of the states in how those states are going to transition their services into person-centered services, into person-centered systems, right? And so in California, and we have until 2023 to come, you know, for services to be fully person-centered across the country. So I had seen there was a question in the chat, is this ending in 2023? Nothing's ending except the grace period where things haven't been going according to, you know, aren't so person-centered. That's ending in 2023. Starting in March 2023, everything we do needs to be person-centered, okay? And that's not a one-size-fits-all. That's, you know, as many different humans as there are that need the service, that's all the different plans there's going to be. So how we've been getting ready is in 2019, service providers conducted a self-review. They said, yeah, we're doing great in these areas, or we're not so great in these areas. And they did their own assessment for how person-centered they are. Then in 2020, during the pandemic, DDS, the Department of Developmental Services, contracted with Public Consulting Group to do virtual site assessments of the service providers in the state of California. And then what we did was, you know, through that, they looked at, you know, was the virtual site assessment in alignment with in agreement with what the vendor said about themselves, or was there some kind of difference between what the vendor said they were doing and what the assessor saw? Part of that assessment was interviewing the people that are receiving services. And so all of that has been done. And now regional centers, there are 21 regional centers in California. Regional centers are now working with our service providers to transition their services into being fully person-centered by March of 2023. And right here, this map of California, these color coding sections, all of these are regional centers. So this red one up here on the left-hand upper northwest of the coast of California, that's Redwood Coast, that's where I'm at. But if you're not sure which regional center that you're working with, you can look at this map and you can contact your regional center if you have further questions about the home and community-based settings final rule. I know we were going to have Q&A. I'm not sure if that's happening. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Sydney.
Thank you, Sierra. And thank you to to the panelists there for your great work and all of the information you provided us regarding the HCBS final rule. ARCA will be responding to your questions asked. We have all of the questions asked, and we will be responding to those and sending you an email on with the responses as we have your email addresses from your registration. So ARCA will be sending out a response to your questions within a week, approximately a week. We will have the information sent to you, and if that the answer is not what you were looking for, please feel free to follow up by contacting the ARCA office. Thank you very much for all of you that have attended. We're very happy to have you, and we appreciate all of the good work that's going on out there with our panelists, and for all of those individuals that are receiving services. Thank you for attending the webinar. Have a good day.